And of course, at that time, there was a proliferation of drugs. Use drugs to stay up, to work, your 12 to 14-hour day.
In the clubs, they were, everyone was they were doing blow and drinking. Basically, there wasn't really nothing else. There was no Molly's. Or it's either, you did coke and you get yourself up and you drink and you put. It was always that mixture, and people knew how to do it really well to keep the air gas mixture going.
What wasn't the drug scene like in the 90s, I mean, then it was ecstasy was just big, cocaine was humongous, acid, I think mushrooms came later on. You could get all kinds of mushroom kind of stuff, but there was Special K, G, I mean, heroin was huge. I mean, if you came to South Beach, then you either, you had to be able to flow kind of like the ocean. I mean, you had to be, because if you didn't, you couldn't last. You couldn't sustain yourself. So many people either died or just had to leave. The people that stayed really stayed. You stay in it. You stayed in it. You could float back and forth from heroin to ecstasy, or I don't know. You could name a couple different drugs, and you could sustain yourself somehow. We made it through, through all of that time.
These were the days where square groupers used to float up over here.
One of the worst memories I have of South Beach was back in 1999 when, I lost 3 friends in the same week. And I thought to myself, I must know either too many people, or I'm spreading myself too thin, or I'm not getting the message. We had all been partying for quite a while, and it was starting to catch up with a lot of people.
Bobby Radical had the pleasure of being in our upstairs office, where we had a green room upstairs where the musicians would hang out. You'd walk in and there'd be, basically a mirror full of coke.
The drug scene from the late 80s was not as diverse. It was sort of marijuana, sort of basic drugs that are more common. Now it's incredibly diverse. We went through the stages from Quaaludes in the 80s to meth now. In between, you had stages where it was primarily cocaine. You had stages where it was primarily ecstasy. These different drugs have had their sort of moment in the limelight, but right now, it's just incredibly diverse with the designer drugs that are coming everywhere. And those are especially dangerous because since they're being cooked up all different ways by different people, different standards, different everything, you do have different impacts.
So basically, everything went on every single level. And, there was a huge drug scene back then, still is, I suppose. But everybody was either, high on cocaine or ecstasy. There was a lot going on, and that was part of the scene back then, and it was definitely fueled by those 2 drugs, probably more than anything else.
The cops would come in and they raided us numerous times. They would come in and throw bags of cocaine all over the place, and they would raid the place. They wanted us down. The city got behind to shut us down. They brought a new police chief in. He was going to make us as an example. Having a 24-hour license and having all that illegal activity going on in the club.
You were a target.
We were a target,
Also in the 80s and the 90s, South Beach was kind of dictated a little bit by the DOC, which was the drug of choice. Depending on what drug was really hot at the time, also depended on what type of club, what type of party, what type of events were going to be really popular. For a while you had Coke was really popular, and that's an up drug, and it made you really happy and really everything. And then ecstasy came around, and that also dictated to big clubs and jumping up and down and dancing and wide-eyed and pumping fists and going crazy. Then you also had the back end where when the lounges, like the smaller places, became really popular with like Special K and heroin and those type of down drugs, the pills and whatever. So the clubs were dictated as of what would happen. Oh, we're going to open up this type of club, blah, 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 because this type of drug was popular at those times. It wasn't really discussed, but that's kind of how, any nightclub and any nightlife scene is dictated.
To me, it was business. I never got caught up in the partying scene and the drug scene and all. I witnessed it all, and I saw who did what. Eventually, every drug dealer went to jail. It was a matter of time until the DEA came in and busted and traced everybody who's spending money, and you're making that type of money, spending it. They're sitting there tracking you. Eventually, they all went to jail.
It wasn't hard to figure out.
Yeah, I remember Willie Falcone and Sal Maguda. They were in federal court downtown. They walked out of court. They went out to go to the bathroom, and they walked out and came out. And instead of disappearing out of the country, they went and hid in Palm Beach, and they're coming in disguises at night back to Club New like no one's going to see them.
See, became big in the 90s.
Huge. Yeah. Huge. And you knew people were tripping balls and stuff like that when the jaws were going wide, and you wanted that. You wanted to make sure.
Then the zombies came.
No, but the more your jaw shattered and ran like a typewriter, you wanted to know who that person's drug dealer was because he was fucking hot. And I wanted to get some of that. That was the crazy part. Look at that guy, he's off tripping balls. I'm like, yeah, I know, who's his drug dealer? It was scary, we would go on these benders.
South Beach is the epitome of adult playground in its, like you said, debauchery.
It was.
Right? I love that. Okay, now that we're on that topic, what was the drug scene like in the 90s?
Lord, the drug scene. All right. Lord. It's sad to say there was one scene, there was a guy, I'm just going to remain people nameless. One night we were on a bender, like on a 4-day bender or something like that.
You and the Butter Sisters?
Me and the Butter Sisters. And we were at the diner here on 11th Street. It was that diner on 11th Street in Washington. And I was in the bathroom, at the urinal, peeing with a certain somebody. And I looked over at him, I'm like, buddy, you've been going all night, how long you been up? He's like, 3 days, I'm going into my 4th day. I'm like, you should go home, you should rest. He's like, fuck it, I'm gonna go home, we're gonna rest, I'm gonna have an after party at my house, I'm gonna kill the night there. So let everybody know we're all going back to my place. I'm like, all right, fine. They all go back to his place. It's around 2 o'clock in the morning, and it turns out that he has a heart attack. Oh, get this is really fucked up. He has a heart attack. And no one thinks to call the ambulance or call the police. Everyone's so geeked out and fucked up. I wasn't there. Everyone's all geeked out and fucked up. So they prop him as he's, because he's still alive. He's got a heartbeat. But they prop him up. They put all the blinds down. They turn up the air conditioner and they leave. That's how fucked up. I mean, instead of calling it, no one wanted to talk to the police. Lord. No one wanted to say this is what we were doing. You're not gonna get arrested for partying. You understand? The drug you just
disclaimer I wasn't there.
Right.
But I did read about it.
But they propped the guy up, they turned up the air conditioning, and they left him there for 3 days later. His neighbors found him. That's how crazy the drug scene was in South Beach.
All the people from Kansas or anyone that discovered us from other cities didn't really know how to fit in. And then, after a couple days, they just let their hair down and decide, like, this is where I'm either meant to be or I'm going to get gobbled up. And South Beach did gobble up a lot of people. There was so much drugs. There was a lot of AIDS. There was, copious amounts of people that just sort of fell off the map and fell into South Beach. And, people never really cared about what your abuse was. It's just kind of, you just fit in. And you could be in clubs at 7:30 in the morning like Ombre, messed up on so many drugs, and no one really judged it. And you could be out for dinner with the same people that same night. No one really pointed fingers, and the drug thing was just part of culture. It wasn't a center of culture. It was just known to be there.
Back in the days was being more like laid back and chill. I think that the drugs were more like like weed and stuff like that. But I think that right now the drug scene in the clubs is different. Also because right now the scene in the club are younger. Before was more mature and everything.
They're stopping it. The drug scene was very normal, I think. Like, I can remember bartending. I'm not going to mention any names, you know. And I mean, somebody walking up and handing me a handful of mushrooms right in my mouth as I was bartending. I mean, it was nothing to do that. Nothing, you know, just to kind of enhance the experience. That's what we did. We go back to no rules. There was very little rules. I mean, yeah, the clubs would get raided once in a while, you know, no doubt. And I think most of us were there for all the raids, you know. Paragon got raided, Groove Jet got raided, I think Space got raided once or twice or 10 times, I don't know.
And I think my funniest memory of Crowbar was, you know, I'm not going to lie, Crowbar at that time, I used to, working at Salvation, I would see people on ecstasy. Once a night, people would be falling down and be like, I'm never going to do that. Look at these idiots. They look like idiots. Oh my God, you're a grown man, what are you doing on this shit? Rubbing each other, glow sticks, Sarah McLachlan. So, said I'd never do it, and then on my 30th birthday I tried it, and then I was working at Crowbar, and the stuff was literally just rampant at the time. At that time in the scene, that's what was going on. And one night I was working, I was out of drag, I was wearing see-through pants and a shiny shirt, my hair was frosted in front. This is what ecstasy will do to you. Had frosted, blonde frosted, a la Ricky Martin. And they came up to me. I was in the back of Crowbar, and they were like, Ricky Martin's in VIP, and I was like, oh my God, Ricky Martin's in VIP. This is it. I'm going to meet him, and I'm going to just act like I've never heard his music, and I really don't know who he is. He's going to be like, oh, my name's Ricky. And we're going to go, hi, what do you do? You look familiar. Well, you know, I would talk about like Pilates and how I'm spiritual, and I run my dog on the beach, and I figured we would meet and become soulmates, and that's how that would happen. So I'm walking all up like Joe Gideon and all that jazz with my shiny shirt and my frosted tips, and I'm all like, I had a ecstasy pill in my stomach, I'm feeling strong, I'm feeling good looking, I'm feeling fierce, I'm feeling really good. I'm walking up to Ricky Martin, I'm just gonna be like, what's up? And that's it, I'm gonna just bowl him over with my charm, and that's it, we're gonna be soulmates, we are gonna be soulmates. And I walk right up and I come up to him, and I'm just about to, so I throw up on his shoes, all over his shoes. Instead of, you know, Pilates and spirituality and dog running on the beach, my pill came out on his shoes. So the next thing I know, by my elbows like this, with my legs flailing like a little turtle, my own security guards were taking me out of the club away from Ricky Martin, and I was screaming, but no, we're soulmates, Pilates. So I'm sure that Ricky Martin meets a million different fans, and he probably has a million different one-night stands. Who knows what goes on in Ricky Martin's life, but I guarantee you he won't forget the guy who threw up on his shoes.
All right, drugs that were prevalent. I mean, it's Miami, so I'm pretty sure I remember everybody doing, definitely weed, definitely cocaine. What were they doing in the 90s? I'm trying to remember. I think they were already rolling in the 90s too. We had a couple ravers raving on in the parties. So I'm pretty sure MDMA was hanging around too.
Well, there's always, I mean, the drug scene has always been there. I mean, you know, so it's a party town. So there's a lot of drugs. You know, we never had heroin here. I can't even remember. You know, heroin was a weird thing that when I was a kid, when I first started going out to the clubs, I never even heard of heroin. I didn't know anybody who did it. And then all of a sudden, you know, it came strong, like, I want to say 15 years ago, 16 years ago. It kind of came strong. Came into the modeling scene, and a lot of the models were doing it. I don't know, from New York or whatever. And I lost a couple of friends. You know, one of my best friends, actually. You know, I miss Jimmy. You know, he was one of the guys that kind of fell into it. But yeah, that was a weird thing. And then K, like, I hadn't even heard of that. How was that? You know, ketamine was just crazy. We used to smoke weed. That was it. You know, we're surfers. We smoked weed. I mean, roofies. That was another thing. We did roofies, which, you know, roofinol. And back then, like, I want to say that surfers were one of the first guys to bring them to Miami. It was like surfers that would go to the Dominican Republic. Yeah. And would go to the Dominican Republic, and friends were being doctors there. They were studying to be doctors, and they would get prescriptions, and they would bring the roofies back. And the roofies were just kind of like, I guess, a downer at the end of the night or whatever, for cocaine or whatever. But It was never a date rape drug, you know. All of a sudden it became a date rape drug, which is crazy that, you know, later on, 20 years later, people started to use it to rape women, which is, I never did that back then. I mean, I remember there was at Fire and Ice, the girls used to walk around like this with their hands on their drink because they knew that they might get dosed. But it wasn't like you know. But no one ever did anything where they got in trouble for it. You know what I mean? But now they end up going crazy and using that to actually rape women. The guy, the zombie guy. What was that? How crazy was that? Whoa, what kind of drug was that? What was he? And they said it was pot. I don't believe it. It couldn't have been pot. There's no way. It was, what did it say it was? Oh, bath salts. I didn't even heard of that. What is that? What is bath salts? So, yeah, I guess the drug scene has kind of changed a little bit. But ecstasy was the best drug that ever hit the beach. I mean, that was always a fun time in the beach. People partying, doing that. And then after everyone got in trouble with that and it just wasn't around anymore, then people started going to harder drugs, which kind of went down and went backwards for the whole place. It wasn't really a happy scene anymore, and then it was kind of a downer scene. When heroin came is when I think that everything just kind of went backwards, you know. But even now, just recently, you know, a couple friends just passed away. Couple guys that I know. Something came into town super strong, and they tried to do it, and the more than they could handle. But it's always going to be here. I mean, it's a party town. Whether you know, cocaine, you know, downers, whatever. It's always going to be here. Drinking. You know, drinking's part of it, so that's where it starts. Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to change. I think we're always going to have drugs here. People want to go out and party. People can always do drugs. That's the bottom line.
The scene in South Beach was almost general.
Almost what?
Almost general. It was everywhere. It was
universal.
It was part of it. I think it was part of. I don't remember anybody being sober at the time. Well, maybe him. You know, maybe there were some people, you know, being sober.
What was the drug of choice?
Drug of choice was coke, ecstasy, or acid. K after, very bad. It was so fun to see people in K. Oh my God! And I think, you know, that's K came after. It was very unpleasant. It was really, you know.
You know, it's funny now that you're talking about it. It's funny how the evolution happened. We got K, and then it was G, GHB.
Oh, the G came
and
after.
And then methamphetamine kind of came in.
But but that was
scene kind of degenerated.
And the scene, but you can see throughout, you know, the years, you know, the scene.
The types of drugs.
The drugs are attached to the scene, the music, the fashion, everything. You know, house music, beautiful music, ecstasy. Yeah. We were so happy
People
to see each other every 2 minutes. People will hug every 2 minutes. I'm very happy to see each other again. And then let's go dance it. It was, I think the drugs were part of the scene and everything was attached together. Everything was intertwined.
But with the music?
Music.
By what the music?
Music, fashion, everything with the drugs, you know. As the scene was changing, as it was, and as it did, I think the drugs were changing too.
That despite all our efforts, there's just as many drugs around today. If you want them, you know, you can access them just as easily today as you could back in the 70s and all, or the 60s. So in that sense, I think we've lost the drug war. And I don't know what the answer to that is, whether legalization of some of these drugs, like marijuana that's going on in Colorado and all now is an answer. But I mean, I think we have to face reality. We haven't stopped it. There's all of it around that you want. It's a huge underground business generating no taxes. So, you know, perhaps it is the time to take some of these things and say, hey, we're better off legalizing some of these things, generating taxes from it and using that money to offset the enforcement in other areas and perhaps even increase the enforcement in some of the heavier drugs, you know.
Life back then, which is kind of the best time of my life, was I'd get up in the morning, we'd work out or go to the beach, hang out at the beach, and then we'd go to roll call at 3 o'clock. in the afternoon, and none of us ever missed roll call because roll call was like comedy hour. We'd go to roll call to tease each other and just have a great time. And then we went to work and got a little serious, and our job back then, I was part of a narcotics unit, so what we would do is our instructions were go out and buy drugs. So we would, we would try to, of course, infiltrate heavy users, not heavy users, heavy distributors or big time dealers. And it's funny.
Say that again. Start from 2, 3.
Our job back then was, I was in the narcotics unit. So we would go out and try to infiltrate, narco traffickers that were selling, in the kilos. We try to infiltrate them and try to buy drugs from them or sell drugs to them. And when we didn't have something lined up or we didn't have a deal to do, we would just walk South Beach and try to go, find a crack house or try to, infiltrate the crack house. And oftentimes we would take over the crack house and then we would become the sellers and sell crack. And that's what we would do. We would do that every day. We would go to bars. The club scene had a lot of drugs at that time. So we would go in there and try to identify drug dealers. It's funny because I see now the legalization of marijuana all over, and we kind of had our own type of it doesn't matter what the legislatures do. The cops that enforce the laws are really the guys that kind of take care of that, because if anybody had pot, we just threw it away. So in essence, marijuana was kind of legal back then because it was such a minor thing with all the high caliber crack and cocaine and even heroin that was out at that time. There were heroin dealers. There was heroin in the clubs. I couldn't tell you how many there were at the time, but we certainly bought heroin and eliminated, took care of it in the clubs many times. In the early 90s, I was part of the Strategic Investigations Unit, which we called SIU at the time. And one of our main objectives was to curtail drug activity at the bars. So we would receive tips. Oftentimes there's drug dealing inside this bar or this nightclub, and we would go in and investigate. And usually what we would do is try to make a few buys from a well-known dealer inside. So we would make 4 or 5 buys at different times, and then we would come in the next day and raid the establishment. The typical thing you see at the movies, go right to the DJ, turn off the music, all the lights on, and of course people would scatter, and we would try to stop as many as we could, but oftentimes you'd witness the floor would be littered with baggies of cocaine and crack and what other drug was of choice at that time.
What was the ecstasy days like in the mid-90s?
X was just coming to play, I believe, in the 90s, and as it progressed every year, it seemed to get worse and worse. And X is the drug of choice. It's the drug of choice for the bar crowd. It's small to conceal, it's easily to take, and it's cheap. It was notorious for drugs. Ombre, exactly. Where was Ombre?
Ombre was near Mars. Remember Mars?
I do remember Mars.
Where that metal thing? It's like between 8th and 9th and 10th.
Okay.
I think it was just north of the Wilsonians.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, it's always...
And then Liquid had a reputation for drugs. The thing is, to me, that back then, the cops, it was very hard for us, at least my unit, to ruin some kid's life over a very small amount of drugs, and we would discuss that quite often. We would say, hey, this is just a kid, a college kid or a tourist, who's never been arrested in his life, who's never done anything, so we just take his drugs and either impound it or flush it down the toilet and let him go on his way. Sometimes we would walk around, like I said, and we would go to a crack house. Usually we would walk down Washington or Collins Avenue, and somebody would say, hey, you want anything? Are you looking for something? And you say, yeah, I'm looking for a dime or a nickel or whatever. And he'd say, okay, walk with me, So we'd walk with that person, and the whole time we have a hidden microphone, so people are listening in, and we have an eyeball, another officer walking behind you, making sure you're okay. So we would walk to an apartment building, usually on Drexel or Euclid or somewhere around there. And this gentleman would provide us access. We'd go inside and we exchanged $10 for a crack cocaine rock. We do this 3 or 4 times during the night, different officers, and then eventually we would go in and arrest everyone in the house and take over the house. So then we would put our people as the sellers, and as people would come up and say, hey, I want a crack cocaine rock or 2 or 20 or 30, we would sell it to them, and immediately as they walked out, we would have a team downstairs or outside that would make the apprehension and take them to jail. And the reason we would concentrate on this is because this type of individual that actually walks down the streets and solicits, a seller, a buyer to come to a house and buy the crack cocaine. Usually those are the guys that are very desperate and will rob someone or, shoot them for a Rolex or their wallet or something like that. So we would deal with that criminal element or the high-end element.
The drug scene back then, I think, in clubs and in, different cities, it's like anything with a trend, okay? Well, Miami's the cocaine kind of capital, if you want to say, in the United States. It's really known for, all the cocaine that gets smuggled in here. So, yeah, you've always had, cocaine as a major drug that a lot of people are on. And as a bartender, you got to deal with those behaviors, because you could get really nasty if you're on a lot of coke and alcohol. So, that's a concern. But I think another trend that started coming in really hardcore during the prime time or the big modeling rush that was here with a lot of the modeling agencies and, people coming into town, celebrities and stuff, there came a time where the trend was heroin in a weird way. And, you started seeing a lot of, like, your friends or people you knew who were so straight edge, all of a sudden ended up in the grips of heroin. So a lot of, that was another drug that kind of stayed around for a while and really took people down. You'd see really a lot of people with a lot of talent and a lot of ambition get caught up on either coke or heroin, and their dreams were never more. That was sad to see. Because a lot of these young girls in the modeling industry, they're 16 years old when they grab them. So by 18, they're a heroin addict, some of them. If they didn't have the right people looking after them and, watching their career or, have that Tyra Banks mommy thing going on, they'd go down. You'd never know who they were. I think one of these girls, do you remember her at the time? Really beautiful, blue eyes, Puerto Rican, gorgeous. She was like a Gia almost. I wouldn't be surprised if they wrote some of that movie off of her. She was gorgeous. Next thing you know, 4 years later, you saw her as a street girl, selling herself on the street. And it's sad because she was unbelievably beautiful. Her name was, who's the guy that does that ABC show, What Would You Do? You don't know that guy, that interviewer that does that show? She had the same last name as that guy. Oh, God, I wish I knew it. She's gorgeous. Bobby, she was so gorgeous.
What agency was she with?
I think she was with Ford. It was really sad. She was like really shot by really brilliant photographers. She was on she did a lot of the Versace ads. And then, next thing you know, she was, she disappeared. Basically disappeared. Beautiful girl though, but these are the trends that we had. And then, ecstasy came on the scene, and then it was a bunch of this, not bass, but techno started coming into the scene because, the clubs go through trends, not only with drugs and not only with alcohol, but also with music.